In 1935, I was about 15 years old, and we already heard on the radio and in the papers. There was no television then. The news, what's going on in Germany, because after World War I, 1918, Germany lost the war, and it was pretty rough times in Germany at the time. The inflation was so high that to buy a loaf of bread, you have to have a whole suitcase of money to buy one loaf of bread. So here comes along this, used to be a painter, Hitler. He's a very poor painter because he couldn't make a living like this. So he used to go in the bars, they call it the beer garden and so on, and just talking and, making lots of noise. And people have a few beers, they agree with him. And next thing, he is a good speaker, he's a good persuasive seducer, and he start getting support in Austria and Germany. And his idea was that Germany should have more room, they don't have enough room to live on. Germany is too small, they should expand, and the biggest enemy, what he can see, are the Jews. Why? Because the Jews controlling the banks, and that's the reason Germany lost World War I, because the Jewish bankers gave the money to the Allies, like America, England, France, just building up some hatred and so on. And, you didn't think about it too much, there's always a few anti-Semites anywhere in the world. They make all kinds of statements. In 1937, when I went to school in Bratislava, this is the capital of Slovakia, it's one of the states. It's about 30 miles from Vienna. They came out on the afternoon news that Germany marched in their troops to Austria, and they called it the Anschluss. The Anschluss means they didn't occupy it, but they joined together like one big nation. And the next day in the news, there's some of the SS troops already came along with the military, and Vienna at the time, or Austria, had 250,000 Jews. And in the streets, they went and broke the windows in the stores, looting, and went to many synagogues and burned the synagogues and the 5 books of Moses and the Holy Ark, and just doing all kind of things. And we as students, we was talking to each other. I said, I wonder, where's the police? And that went on for about a year or so, and then the next thing, Hitler wants Sudetenland, which is part of Czechoslovakia, bordering Germany. And in Sudetenland, the majority was Germans. Sudetenland used to belong to Germany, but after World War I, Woodrow Wilson had a lot to do with it and created a free Europe like Poland and Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia and other countries. They divided up the borders, who is who. So Hitler, the first thing he wanted Sudetenland. So America was kind of so far away, these days, because communication and transportation wasn't as fast as it is today. But France and England, it was close by, and they started to negotiate with Hitler. So Daladier, the French foreign minister, and Chamberlain, who is the British foreign minister, went to Berlin and discussed the thing with Hitler, from Ribbentrop, his foreign minister, And they all decided that it's not worth to risk a war, and they're just going to persuade Czechoslovakia to give up the Sudetenland. Sure, Czechoslovakia was very unhappy about it, and Chamberlain walked out of after the meeting for the news media and said, we bought peace in our time. Later on, Germany marched in and took over all the munition, tanks and cannons and all kind supply what you need for a war machinery. They were shocked. There's all brand new equipment. So Hitler decided now he got an army, now he got enough military equipment, go march 3 weeks later, go march right on into Poland. That's the way Chamberlain and Daladier, bought peace at that time. So that was 38, in 39 they went into Poland. Poland at least put up a fight for 3 weeks, but they wasn't strong enough. And Hitler and Stalin already decided that they're going to divide up Poland. One will take one half, the other will take the other half. And after Stalin and Hitler made the deal to divide up Poland, and Stalin believed Germany. Hitler, he thought he's a great guy. And he was warned by some of his military not to put too much faith in Hitler. And he said, no, Hitler is just like me. I know we understand each other. He wouldn't dare to do it. But sure enough, Hitler attacked Russia. And they went in all the way to Stalingrad. You probably read it from history. And about 20 million Russians got killed during this war. Russia was not prepared against Hitler, and they didn't believe they will do it. Then in 1944, about in spring, Russia started to counterattack through the southern flank, through Romania, Bulgaria, and toward Hungary. So Hitler wanted to be sure he will put up the right front against Russia, so they moved into Hungary and part of Yugoslavia to be able to protect themselves. In the meantime, Hitler decided that he wants to have the final solution. Final solution, he wants to kill all the Jews in Europe. Because once he kills all the Jews, it'll be a better world. Later on, he decided to do this to the Gypsies, and later on, he decided to do it to the communists and anybody who don't agree with him. So he started with the concentration camp. We had no idea the concentration camp. We always thought it was a working camp, doing some work for the German military, but it was really factories to kill people and burn the bodies. That's all it was. So after Hitler came into to Hungary, the Polish papers was no good anymore because the SS picked up the first thing, all the Polish immigrants, where there was enemy number one. So back to Slovakia, and I joined the underground, the partisans in the mountains. And this was in March or April of 1944. And for about a year, we lived in the mountains because the German military controlled the highways and the valleys, where the partisans controlled the high mountains, and every tree was an enemy to the German. So they didn't go into the woods because they didn't know who is behind the tree. And we lived through the whole winter in the mountains, in bunkers, built underground, until April 1945. First, a group of us, about 55, We run out in food, and the Germans had pretty well controlled every route into the mountains because they had lots of problems. We, blew up bridges and trains, for their military this. So they wanted to make sure we cannot get out of the mountains. They didn't want to come in and get killed, but they sealed it all off. So they run out of food. And during the night, we heard lots of dueling in one of the valleys. And we were so sure that the Russians broke through there. We didn't have no communications, no radios, because everything was cut off, controlled by Germany. So we walked for about 24 hours, and we marched right on into the German positions. They saw us coming down in the snow, but we didn't see them. They was in the valley. So they opened up machine gun. Of the 55, 5 of us survived. The rest of them they killed. 3 days later, 3 of us only decided to look down, because in the valley there, or in the mountains, many people died from hunger because the situation was very rough, about 17 days without food. So we walked over, over the mountains to the other valley, and we was very lucky. This a day before, the Russians defeated the Germans in this little town, and the Germans moved on, and the Russians are after them. So we was liberated in reality by the Russians then, but we was supposed to be allies because we was partisans on their side. I was already very weak and I couldn't make the trip back, but one of the 3 got some help in this town for a group of about 25 men to take some provisions, some food, the backpack into the mountains, because there was many people there just very nearly starving. And that's the only open route, we can do it. So I wound up in the hospital because the first meal I ate, I probably eat too much, in a peasant home, I remember like today, she was feeding me with rice and milk soup, So in the hospital, I had no patient to stay there. They was pumping my stomach and wanted to know what's my problem and so on. But I wanted to go home and see who left, what's going on, where it is. And after 2 days, they wouldn't let me out. They're not through with it. I got myself some clothes, and I just walked out of the hospital and caught a ride, to my hometown. And then when I find out, what happened really, because very few people survived. In the meantime, I got sick in the hospital. The other side of the highway of the valley got free too. Bernard came down this way, and we both met back in our hometown. It was about 50 miles away. See, my father died when he was very young, in 1930. And my mother and all my brothers, all my sisters, all the uncles, all of them got killed in concentration camp, or in Auschwitz, or in Birkenau, or in Majdanek. He killed 6 million Jews. He killed 6 million non-Jews, different nationalities. He killed 20 million Russians. People who survived, like Aranka was there. She saw there. She was there with my sister. My sister didn't survive. The reason Aranka and I didn't survive, they was working the needle machine, you know what I mean, and they was doing, uniforms for the Germans. So who they needed, they kept alive. Who they didn't need, they killed.
I'm Selina Fine. I was born and lived in Warsaw, Poland. And in order to survive the war, I had to change my identity. I was not known as Selina Fine. I had to change my name and pretend that I was a Christian girl. And my name was Anna Zakrzewska instead of Celina Fine. I survived the war in Germany under the false identity with false papers. I attempted to run away from the ghetto twice, and I was looking for a hiding place for my family and myself, and I did not succeed. Nobody wanted to give us a refuge. And I was not really angry because it was very dangerous for other people to hide the Jewish people. Anyone who would be discovered hiding Jewish people in their homes, they would be shot, just like the Jews. So I couldn't blame them, but I tried. I twice escaped from the ghetto. I tried to find a hiding place anywhere, in the woods, in the forest, underground, anywhere, but I couldn't find it. So I returned back to the ghetto, and accidentally, a very good friend of ours who lived outside of the ghetto, he met a German nurse, and her home was in Wittlich, Germany. She, in a casual conversation, told him that her family is looking for a girl to help them in a restaurant and a butcher shop that they had in that city, in Wittlich, Germany. So this friend of ours immediately thought of me, because I was at the right age. I was only 15 years old at that time. I was not married. I didn't have any attachment to children, to a husband. I was free to go. So he thought of me, and he sent a message to the ghetto that such an opportunity came about, and if I would be interested to go. At that time, half of my family was already taken away. But I had a wonderful sister, and she was the oldest sister, much older than I was. She was married, and she had 2 little boys, twins. She was quite comfortable financially before the war, and she still was comfortable enough that she could purchase false papers for me from the underground. So she paid a very large amount of money to the underground. They supplied us with paper. My picture was put on that, this was called the Kenkarte. I signed the Kenkarte, my picture was put on that, and then I went outside from the ghetto, which was not easy. This was another very difficult and dangerous thing, because the ghetto was surrounded by Germans with the guns, and no one was allowed to leave or to come back or to enter. We were just like in a cage. But somehow I managed to sneak out from the ghetto. I went to this German nurse. I introduced myself. I presented my new identification papers, my Kenkarte, and this is how I managed to go to Germany. Now, at the end of the existence of the ghetto, when they had the ghetto uprising, which was in 1943, more weapons came in from the Polish underground, and therefore they could resist the Germans just for a few days. And there were some German casualties. They came in with the heavy tanks, and they were facing some of the guns of the ghetto community. But as a rule, we did not have any weapons. That's why this terrible tragedy happened. Nobody helped us, just a very small amount of underground from the Polish side. And my whole family, our family consisted of 9 children, my parents, my 2 oldest, oldest brother and my oldest sister was married, and my brother had a child. My oldest sister had 2 children, 2 twin boys. They all perished. Our family, the direct family plus the extended family, consisted of about 300 people. And I am the only survivor because we didn't have any help from the world. We didn't have any weapons. I wouldn't dare to reveal my great secret because I couldn't trust anyone. However, my dear, after the war was over, and when I left these people, their name was Kiskin, family Kiskin, and they were Nazis, I didn't tell you that. But when I arrived, there was a big portrait of Hitler hanging right there in the living room. That's the first thing I saw when I came in. And I thought, oh no, is that where I'm going to live for a few years with this portrait of Hitler in the center place of the house? But they were Nazis, and they strongly believed that Hitler did the right thing to the Jews. And they said to me, now you see this person? He is the savior of the world. He is the one that will get rid of all the Jews. And finally, we're going to have a world without Jews. So you can imagine that I couldn't reveal my true identity to anyone in that surrounding. The first few days when I arrived, the contrast was so drastic that I broke out in a high fever, and I had to stay in bed for 3 days. I was in a state of a shock before I could really realize that I am in a normal world again. It took me a while to adjust to the normal living conditions. And the people, since they didn't know that I was Jewish, they liked me very much. And they felt that I'm a very sweet young little girl, and they liked my work. And this was the paradox of the whole situation. When I was in the ghetto, the Germans decided that I have no right to live. I should die. But when I was among them, they liked me very much, and they didn't see any difference between me and the German people, the German children around.
I had a sister and my mother and father, and we were deported to a concentration camp in France. This was occupied France. We were there for several months. Time was irrelevant at that time because we were little and it just didn't matter. We had terrible conditions. We had to sleep on straw. We were given some water that was black, had little bugs swimming around. That was supposed to be our soup. And one day, some underground French agency came to the camp. I still have never learned how they were allowed to come into the camp. They asked the authorities if they could speak to the parents of small children. And they apparently asked my parents and my sister and I whether they wanted us out of the camp and perhaps rescued for the rest of the war. And when I think about it myself now with children of my own, I don't know how my parents did it, but they said, yes, take the children. And the last time I ever saw my mother and my father was waving goodbye from the back of a bus. We were in a strange land, and everyone spoke French, and we only spoke German. We couldn't understand what was going on. And we knew that it had been awful there, and here all of a sudden we were being taken away from our parents. As a matter of fact, my sister, for many, many years, suffered from a psychological problem. She wouldn't admit to it until she did, because it had to do with the difference of the way we related to that situation. She felt that our parents should have kept us, and that it wasn't fair of them to give us away. And I always thought that they were just so courageous and that they knew what would happen to them. That they were that unselfish that they were willing to give their children away. I'm sorry that we're all so emotional about this, but it's part of our life and sometimes it gets a little heavy. When I went through the war years, my sister and I were very fortunate because we always got to stay together. During the night, at various times during the war, we were taken out of wherever we were at the time, which was usually an orphanage, different places, and taken somewhere else with the warning that we were not to say anything. We were taught French immediately, of course, so that we wouldn't seem to be foreigners, and German Jews especially. We were placed with a family in France, a farm family, and they weren't supposed to know that we were Jewish either. They were Catholic, and we had to go to church and pretend we knew prayers that we could mouth. But the priest was apparently pro-Nazi also, and he preached about how bad the Jews were, so we couldn't go to church anymore. We did tell our family that we were Jewish, and they were just wonderful. They took care of us, risking their own lives, and the neighbors wouldn't speak to them because apparently the word leaked that they were protecting two Jewish kids. So there were many instances where we had some terrible experiences.
When Germans invaded my native country, Poland, they had advanced, you might call squads or teams or, I don't know, groups of soldiers. They were death squads. They came, and they came for specific reasons to immediately kill off as many Jews as possible, particularly those that would qualify as community leaders. You see, among Jews, we revere rabbis, teachers, doctors, lawyers. We have a very profound respect for such people. But in Europe, it was even more so. So the Germans were not the comical figures that sometimes you see from Hollywood. That's a big mistake. They knew exactly what they were doing. It was almost like scientifically thought out. If you eliminate the leadership of a community, what do you have? You have ordinary people, mostly with limited education, artisans, blue-collar workers, such, and women and children. How much resistance can you have from such people? They would eliminate first the people that were the greatest danger to them. And then it was a Jewish neighborhood, if it was convenient, or if not, it was maybe a particular place, maybe it was if it was a particularly small village, they would herd everybody into the village synagogue. And so those were the first experiences. This is how we were rounded up. But it was still very early in the game, and they were not as well organized, so food became scarce, other commodities, and if you had something to barter, to trade, then you could possibly buy your life or buy your time, a little extra time. Papa found a farmer going by with a wagon full of hay that he was taking somewhere, I don't know. And he told the man that, look, I have 2 sacks of flour. If you take me on your wagon under the hay with my wife and child and take me to the border, that was the Russian border, I'll give you the 2 sacks of flour. So our first experience was that our lives were bought with 2 sacks of flour. Just flour for making bread. And once we were in Russia, it was like from the frying pan into the fire. Because at that time, Stalin and Hitler had a non-aggression pact. And the Russians have always been anti-Semites, we spoke Yiddish, which sounds very much like German and is in effect a German sort of intertwined with a lot of Hebrew in it. So not only were we Jews, but we sounded like Germans. And they were absolutely paranoid of foreigners in those days. This was when Stalin would purge all these people that didn't agree with him. He killed off millions of people. They would not let us live in metropolitan populated centers, in cities. And we were city people. We were not farmers, you know. So it was very difficult because being as we were displaced suddenly, no country, no roots, and because of your religion, no one is going to be punished if they kill you. It was very difficult, and as time went on, they made us move deeper and deeper into Russia, and finally they sent us where Russians have sent prisoners from the beginning of time, Siberia. Well, we were dumped, literally, in Siberia, in a region that's called the taiga. It's a Russian word. The taiga is very huge. It's like half a continent, and it's Arctic weather the year round, and nothing but great, great forests. And they had sort of makeshift barracks set up, and Papa remembers in this first camp when they were brought, and since they had been brought up in the 30s as socialists and rights for workers, and you understand, they thought that, well, Russians are not going to hurt us. After all, in a sense, they felt a certain kinship. So everybody was in shock that the Russians should behave this way. And Papa remembers when we came, at the end of the day, to one particularly desolate place with hardly any housing for the children or women, and the commandant stood up on something so that he could look down at us, you know, and he said, here you will build your Warsaw. So I would say really that from my own memories, the hunger, the cold, the brutalities, the suicides, I guess what you'd call the breakdowns. The only thing we didn't have in Russia, thankfully, were the ovens. We were not gassed and burned. But everything else, we had the same as all Jews in Europe, the same misery. I never knew that anything was that wrong. I thought that all this running and hiding and the cruelties and the dangers and the hunger, that awful hunger, that's how everybody lived. After we were gotten out of the taiga, my father's tailoring was very, very useful. He was always put to sewing military uniforms, and that was considered a very important job for the civilian population to provide for the military. I was in his shop on such a spring day, very sunny and mild, and he had given me some little patches of fabric to make a doll, and suddenly I heard the whole shop go quiet. Two men walked in, very silent, didn't identify themselves, didn't say anything, walked over to my father, whispered something to him. He turned white. No, not white. he turned gray. I thought he was going to just drop that minute, but he didn't. He walked over to the woman that was like his second in command, the assistant in the shop, and he told her, take over. And he put on his coat, and he left. He walked out the door, and they had a car, big black car. Cars were very rare there, so I remember the car. It was very much like a London taxi, that kind of a car. And they sort of pushed him in. And I ran after him about a block. I remember the dust in my face. So the trauma of that alone was, I mean, one instant I have a father, and the next instant I don't. And that day, when they took him away from the shop, Mama, of course, didn't know. She came about an hour later. And when she found out, she was devastated. And then we started running from one, I guess you'd call precinct, to another, to ask, where is he? Where is he? They would not tell us. For 2 months, 3 months, I think, we did not really even know where my father was being kept. This is Russia, under Stalin. The world is crazy. And then began a period that was extremely, extremely hard, that, as I say, had I known at the beginning what was coming, I would have, because as a political prisoner's family, we were totally cut off from any rations, from any help, from any protection. Anyone could do anything with us that they wanted, and there would be no law to protect us. And Mama would go out and try to sell. There's always a bazaar in Russia, where people try to sell things. And she sold clothing and coats, anything we had. So when Mama would go in the morning to the bazaar to try and sell one of these garments or a blanket or anything, she had to literally lock me in our room, and with like what you call a padlock, I guess, and open it, when she came home. She couldn't leave me with anyone. There's no one to leave me with. And luckily that room had a large window, and I remember sitting by the hour, day after day, and of course this went on for 2 or 3 more years before we were finally liberated and the war ended. But sitting at that window and just looking and looking for the slightest figure that would resemble my mother, because about half a mile away down the hill was the trolley that would have brought her home from the bazaar. And I'd sing to myself, and I'd make up little stories. And I even had a pet. Oh, I must tell you about my pet. I've never had a pet since, but in those days, I was so lonely. There were mice in the building. And one mouse found itself into our room. They can get into any place. I had no other contact. And that kind of existence lasted for 7 to 8 months out of the year, because the weather was too cold and my mother could not take me anywhere with her. I studied history because from my childhood, I only remember events. But later, as I was older and studied, I began to put the events to the right dates, you see? And I think in a way I prepared myself to remember. Uh, we have a feeling amongst us, people with my background, that we are witnesses. We have to give very accurate testimony about a crime, just as if you were in court. If you had seen a murder, you have to testify.
My name is Ruth Kane, and I grew up in Berlin, Germany. I was born in Berlin, Germany, and spent the largest part of my childhood right there. I had a strange feeling all the time that something wasn't quite right, because whenever my sister and I entered a room and my parents quit talking, there was something we weren't supposed to know. And often they were quite angry in their discussions, and we also knew they weren't angry at each other. They were discussing something very serious. The street where I lived, it was an apartment house, and this street was a very quiet little connection between two major thoroughfares. There wasn't much traffic, and all the kids played out in the street. We played ball, we played hopscotch, we played all the games that kids play outside. And almost everybody had a buddy of some kind, boys, girls, either together, separately, whatever, but we were usually a group. There was one particular girl who was a special friend. She lived across the street. Her name was Ursula. We were the same age, and we kind of hung out more together than with most others. One day, I think it was in 1933 or 34, and she told me she would not be available that afternoon because she had been invited to a group meeting, a girls group called Organization of German Girls. I had no idea what that was, and I didn't ask her. I hadn't been invited, so I felt no reason to ask any more about it. I figured that could wait till she came back and I could find out what I wanted. Sure enough, the next day I saw her again, and she had a uniform on. It was light brown. It had all kinds of insignia on the pockets and on the sleeves, and a big black swastika on her left arm, I think it was. Thought it was a little bit funny, but I walked up to her and I said, "Hi, how are you doing? How did it go yesterday at your meeting?" I happened to stand with my back against a street light. It was kind of an old-fashioned gas light. You might have seen them in old movies. I was kind of leaning back into it with my hands on my back. And she looked at me and she said, "You dirty Jew witch." And she grabbed my forehead with one arm and she gave a big shove right into that to that post against which I was leaning. I was I think I was almost out. I'm surprised I didn't faint because it was unbelievable. The store went downhill quite quickly because the Germans started to boycott Jewish businesses, and not enough of that, they started to purposely and deliberately ruin them as fast as they could. They scribbled ugly signs on them, swastikas, and "This is a Jewish store, don't buy from Jews," anything to that effect to keep people from walking into the stores and shopping there. After a while, that wasn't enough, and a bunch of hooligans came and broke in, smashed the windows. The whole thing was vandalized, and all my mother and her brother managed to save a few bolts of fabric that they took home and tried to sell out of the house. And then came the day when I went to school one morning on the subway. It was the 8th of November, 1938. 9th of November. Yeah. It was the 9th of November. And from the exit of the subway to school, I had to walk about 2.5 quite long blocks. I came out of the subway, and the street through which I had to pass was lined with businesses, of which most were owned by Jewish people. There were some clothing stores, some fabric shops, some jewelry stores, some type delis. Only it looked like after a bomb raid. Practically every window was broken along the street. All the merchandise had been looted. There was so much broken glass on the sidewalk that I walked, I think, almost ankle deep. And after about half a block, I met kids coming back whom I knew from school, my own classmates or from other grades. And they said, no school today, no school anymore. The school is totally destroyed. There's no way there can be school anymore, at least not till it's rebuilt. Well, so I didn't bother going any further either, so I joined them and went back to the subway station. It was scary, because there were all kind of kids in the street who made a holiday out of the whole affair. They must have skipped school themselves to have some fun with us or something like that. Because, now, I'm glad they didn't pick up glass to throw at us, but they threw other things, whatever they could find. They threw pebbles, they threw small objects, they threw all kinds of things. And we tried to run, but you just can't run in glass. So we walked as fast as we could back to the subway station. Somehow we got home. We were really petrified. We didn't know where to go, we didn't know where to look, nobody helped us. The police was conveniently absent. We were just on our own, totally. Now, this particular event has been called the Crystal Night because there was so much glass in the streets. There were some horrible reports about people disappearing. They've been taken away. My own Jewish friends in the neighborhood all of a sudden went there. My mother never explained it when I asked her. She says they must have moved. We had taken lots of Jewish people on Crystal Night, but not us. They had burned synagogues. They had taken away people in the area surrounding synagogues. They just picked them up, loaded them on trucks, and shipped them out. Then a night or two later, they came to our neighborhood. Now the thing is that the Germans, the Nazis I should say, had lists of all Jewish residents. We were registered like any normal citizens would be with the city. And they had addresses from all the Jews. So all they had to do was go there, ring the doorbell, pick them up, or kick the door down, threaten people with guns, tell them to pack a little suitcase, and out, out, out. Didn't care who it was, if they were young, if they were old, if they were sick, if they were dying, it didn't make any difference. And we heard the trucks rumble, and we didn't dare move. We pulled down our shades, we cut off the lights. We didn't dare make any kind of noise at all, of fear of being detected, of even being there. My mother just said like this, and we stood there in the middle of the room. I'll never forget it. We had the record player on before, having played soft music. Everything went off, and she stood there, and she held on to my sister and myself. She grabbed us each one by the forearm like this, and I think she said it more to herself than to us. She says, I won't let them take you, I won't let them take you. And she repeated this over and over. Well, it scared me more than anything else because I felt she wasn't talking to us, she was talking to herself. And by some miracle, I don't know what did it, they didn't come to our house. we heard things going on all around us. We heard people screaming. We heard marching. We heard something that I interpret as, I don't know if it was clubbing or beating. You can hear something hitting something. We heard children crying, and it was just such terror. You didn't know what to do with yourself. You just stood. In January 1939, the Jewish community in Berlin decided that they would try to rescue some children from under the grasp of the Nazis. They had shipped out enough children. They tried to at least save some. So in conjunction with the Jewish community in Stockholm, Sweden, they organized a group of 500 children to be sent to Sweden for safekeeping. They had lined up 500 families in Sweden, most of them in Stockholm, a few of them in the next largest cities, to take in one child each. And I was lucky enough to be one of these 500 children who were chosen to be sent away. My mother told me about that, and she tried to make it a happy event like going on vacation, but I took that with a grain of salt. And I simply didn't want to leave home. I mean, my family was my security. I knew it was a rough world out there. But as soon as I was within the walls of my house, there was a certain type of security. Well, finally I realized that's what she really wanted, and I really didn't have any choice. She had given me the benefit of asking and discussing it, but it really wasn't up to me. That it was their decision, and I had to leave. And so she packed a little suitcase with a nice dress and a couple of older things, whatever little things. And I said, can I have some pictures? Can I have something from home to take? She says, no, don't take too much. You'll be back soon, trying to allay my fears. And I believed her. Foolishly enough. I should have insisted, but I wasn't smart enough. So I went without any mementos, anything from home, just the clothes on my back and a little suitcase. And they took me to the train, my mother, my sister, my uncle. My grandmother was too elderly, she couldn't come. And they tried to keep up a brave front and a few smiles, which weren't too good. And I was up there in the window, and I said, bye, somehow. And this is so hard to talk about. Anyway, I saw them disappear in the distance, and I just had to prepare myself for some kind of a new scenario, a new agenda, and hoping. I didn't know what I hoped. I was quite numb, I think. I didn't know what to expect. I know I cried, and the group leader tried to console me, but I just felt totally lost. And I guess I wasn't a very happy child. I was homesick, desperately homesick. So they tried to get my sister to come and join me. That wasn't easy, and it never worked. Unfortunately, my sister was just a little bit beyond the age limit the Swedes or the Germans had stipulated for leaving. The cutoff age was 16, and my sister was just a little bit beyond 16, so they didn't give her permission to leave. No matter how the people in Sweden tried, and they tried very, very hard, they tried to have her come as an employee in some family if possible, not as a child of that group, but get her out as a working girl to come and work for some people who then could send her a guarantee that she would be working and she could live with them. And it was very hard to find people to do that, because all the potentials had been taken up for the 500 children to accommodate those. And after much, much trying, this darling family of mine found an elderly lady who was unmarried, whom they asked to take my sister either as a help in the house or a companion. Well, she thought it over and said, well, maybe that would be possible. So with much hope, we got the papers together for her to sign. That was the prerequisite to even get a visa to come to Sweden, that somebody would be ready to receive her so she wouldn't be a burden on the state. And when we came, there was all the papers. I wasn't with them. They went. My family went alone. The father of the house. She had changed her mind. She wasn't sure it was quite legal, and she wasn't sure it was quite that, and she wasn't sure she wanted the responsibility. So the whole thing fell apart. And she might as well have signed the death warrant for my sister, because my sister didn't make it. Eventually she and my mother and everybody was picked up and deported. Throughout all this time, I wrote home, and my mother and my sister and my uncle faithfully answered. I wanted to allay their worries about me. They didn't know how I was faring. And I told them how nice the people were and how well they took care of me and what I did in school and what I was learning. And I could hear from their letters to me that they were greatly relieved that they really didn't have to worry about me. And one time my mother wrote, close to the end, these and these people have left. It is possible that we might have to go on a trip in the near future. I'm sure she was trying very hard to tell me something. Now, she couldn't tell me a whole lot point blank because the Nazis censored all mail leaving Germany. In fact, I have her last letter here, and the way they censored it, they poured some kind of a chemical across the pages, so if there were any invisible ink that had been used, it sounds like a spy story. Ordinary people didn't use invisible ink. It would be detected through this chemical. It would show up. The Nazis had written recipient Jew, underlined the word Jew, unknown, and moved away, no forwarding address, something to that point, something to that effect. And that was the letter that I had written to them. This came back like this. Well, then I knew there was no need to write anymore. Finally, 1945 rolled around. I was working in a very nice place, and the war was suddenly over. And there I had some kind of hope again. Now, maybe. There must be somewhere, maybe. The only way to find out was through the Red Cross, because the Red Cross had been active throughout the last months of the war everywhere where camps were being liberated slowly by the Allies, by the Russians in part. And people were taken, survivors were taken out of the camps, and many of them came to Sweden for medical treatment, because the camp population was in extremely bad shape medically. Many of them came to Sweden, and the Red Cross supplied lists of survivors to every facility who wanted it. But I scanned them eagerly, day after day and day after day, full of hope going there, and sadly disappointed leaving there because the names that I was looking for just weren't on it. And this went on for maybe 6 weeks until they had gathered all the information from everywhere. And finally, well, there were no more lists to look through. And I went over the old ones one by one just to make sure I hadn't missed anything. And finally I had to admit to myself that these names just would not be on any survivors list ever.
So, like I say, the war for us, I remember the day Hitler came to power. I was 7 years old. I remember sitting in our tenement apartment and whispering. Someone came to visit us. And we whispered, I remember the grown-ups whispering to one another, you know, Hitler came to power today. That was in January of 1933. Whatever you might have heard about the war, it was long before 1939 that Jews were in trouble and had a war. And it's not just Jews. I remember anybody who wasn't whatever Hitler and his party wanted whomever to be. It wasn't just Jews, but they didn't always know. You see, we did not have black people. We did not have Hispanic people. We did not have anyone except this Germanic bunch of people. So they didn't always know who we were, but they made it their business to find out. People disappeared. You know, you woke up in the morning and they were no longer in the neighborhood. Or they'd been hauled off to camp, concentration camps. But I was never, my family died in concentration. We went to the American consulate where my father had to swear and sign an affidavit that he was paying my passage because the American government could not have a burden of paying or taking the responsibility. Then the organization called the Council for Jewish Women locally throughout the United States took the bond for these children who were being placed in homes. They took responsibility if I was a thief or whatever. They would be responsible if I did anything wrong. You know, I might have had to be deported legally. This is not just a sad story. It's a story of love, of interest, of people who have shared the goodness in them. And this is what you're doing. I came to this country when I was 12 years old, by myself. And you have to understand and you have to envision either being sent away from home for whatever reason. This was done because my family loved me. They couldn't get out. So they sent one of the children who was qualified to go. I was well. I was the right age group. I was chosen by an organization that was taking children out. I think I was able to leave my family at 12 years of age because I really thought I could see them again. If perhaps I'd been a little bit more mature and a little older, I would have realized that's unrealistic. So then, after my father died, which was in 1941 in Auschwitz, I still corresponded with my mother and my sister. My brother was already at another camp, and presumably my mother and sister heard from him. The last communique I had with my family was a letter I wrote on my 16th birthday. That was in November of 1941. We entered the war that December of 1941. That letter was returned to me the following August.
When the First World War came, I was in Europe, in Lithuania. And I was about, I guess, 8, 9 years old. And it looked like that the German Kaiser is going to occupy Russia and enslave the people. But the United States of America, they came with their armies, they landed in Lithuania, and they have conquered the German country, and they left thousands of their soldiers give their life. Thousands were crippled, and they didn't do anything. They didn't ask anything to people. Soon they got through, got everything in order. They turned around and went back to the United States. And 20 years later, when the sons of those people that gave their lives became at age 20, 22 years old, that when the World War II came, a wild man by the name Hitler, decided to conquer the European countries. And also he wanted to wipe out the whole Jewish nation, the whole Jewish people. Kill him. I was one of the Jewish people, fortunately that I was here. But my parents, my sisters, and all the other friends and relatives were all murdered. My sister had a 6-month-old baby in her arms. They killed her and they killed that baby. My mother and that little area around Lithuania, they just made big holes and killed them, threw them in there for nothing, for no reason. And they have killed like that 6 million of the Jewish people. Men, women, young, old. Some saw they see a Jewish child walking in the street, maybe 5, 6, 7 years old, I think. They'll get him by the leg and hit him, stone wall, brick wall, and kill him. And they have like that wiped out a big part of the Jewish people, not only of the European continent, but of the world. And that's where the war number 2. They saw what's happening. So the sons, like I say, are the fathers from the First World War. They left their homes here, their businesses, their families, and they flew in swimming boats for thousands of miles to save the European continent from the Nazis.
I'm also been in the ghettos and also witnessed some massacres and fled from the ghettos into the woods, into the underground, joined the partisans and lived with them and fought with them together for 2 years. And we were groups from 200 to as high as 2,000. We also, the Germans tried to counter us with train loads, so they put maybe 4 or 5 boxcars with sand in front of the train. So whenever it hit a mine, it blew up the track and some of the boxcars with the sand. So after we found that out, we didn't have no choice, but we had to be there and wait for the train whenever it comes. And whenever the train came, it was very risky, and a lot of us got killed or wounded in the process. But we had to stay there and see when the train comes and visualize them when they send boxcars pass through that point of explosion, halfway maybe of the train length, and we exploded at that time, and then we had to take it off and ran. So we succeeded in many ways. Originally, we all were in ghettos. I've never been in concentration camp, but a ghetto is a part where they picked in a town or a city where they apart, and they got all the Jews in one area. We as youngsters in particular got organized and hoping to get to the woods. We didn't know exactly at the time if it exists any underground or anything like that. But we all hoped and prayed that if we'll escape and come there, we will find somebody that's in resistance. Eventually, we didn't want to go to find somebody in the resistance without having any weapons with us when we're going out from there. And so it happened that we worked on the railroad stations where we were loading ammunition where the Russians and the Poles left over when the Germans went and jumped on them at the time, and they retreated and left everything behind. So we were loading all those rifles and small tanks. We used to cut them in 4 pieces and load them on the boxcars back to the factories and so on. And we stole some rifles with us under long coats. We also had a Star of Morgan David where we were carrying on our clothes where we were going from the railroad tracks to the ghetto. And we brought in this kind of weapons into the ghetto. And we got a little bit organized. In the meantime, we heard that there is somebody in the woods that is in resistance. And finally, one time, we just, in the middle of the night, we decided a group of 20 youngsters, ages 16 to 21. And we went out and went all night long through swamps, lakes, water, and some small woods until we arrived in a small area outside the ghetto and surrounded a farmer and got some food for us so we can keep on going on, and left from there and went to the woods deeper, farther away from the ghetto. It took us 2 nights and 2 days, and we have to be very careful before we got contact with any underground, because we heard before we went out that it was bands in the woods that they were against Jews to start with. They have Poles that collaborated with Germans. There were even Russians from Ukraine that they were collaborating with Germans. And we heard, in fact, it was true that the youngsters came into the woods and thought this is some part of the underground, and it so happened that it wasn't underground, and they got killed. So after 2 days and 2 nights, we finally got a contact. We saw always when you go in the woods, you watch somebody else, not somebody else watches you. And so we run into, it looked like Jewish faces. And we could more or less recognize more or less if it's Jews or not Jews. And we finally got lucky and got in touch, and it was Jewish people. And they were organized. But they were a small group of 150 people. And they were there for about 9 months earlier. I was at the age of 14, and they picked up 60 youngsters. We didn't know where we would be taken to. They took us on the edge of a wood area, and we dug graves. We dug 3 mass graves. And after we got through with that, we went back to the ghetto. And evidently, they was trying to get all gold, diamonds, clothing, furs, and things like that from the Jewish people down there. And they told them they'll be safe if they'll give all those stuff away. Naturally, the Jewish people responded to it, and they did give a lot of stuff away. And they said to everybody to go home, and everybody is safe. The next morning, after it happened, they woke us up in the morning about 5 o'clock and screamed, yelled at everybody to come out in the center of the city down there. and they told them to go for families, like soldiers walking, and families 4, 6, whatever they are, each one of them paraded in front of the SS, and they divided families or sent families to the right, to the left, and the one they sent straight down, I knew that they're going to be massacred. And sure enough, my family was fortunate at that time that they sent us to the right and we were left alive. But at that time, I lost maybe about 40 close relatives like uncles, aunts, my grandmother and cousins and so on. They perished in that massacre. We heard all this shooting going on, and a lot of us didn't know, but I did know what was happening because I was there when I dug those graves. And after everything quieted down, they sent everybody who were to the right and to the left, who've been left for a second time for the next massacre. They sent them back to the ghetto. After that, they picked up another 100 youngsters, and I was one of those, and my brother was one of those, that we were there. And when we came to that point where we dug the graves, we witnessed a massacre of approximately 5,000 Jewish people lying in the graves, in 3 of them. And clothing was separated. Women's clothing, women's shoes in piles, men's clothing, men's shoes in different piles. And I witnessed a horror thing. In the graves, while those innocent people were lying in the graves, several young people were there in the grave where they were wounded, but they weren't killed. They were still alive. They came out begging and yelling, don't cover us up. We are alive. When the SS people saw it, they walked up straight to these people and shot them straight in their heads.
42, they started to pick up Jews all over Czechoslovakia. They took him away, like I said, 10 of my family, plus my mother, and my brothers and sisters were married, they had spouses and children. So it was a very large family, and they were all wiped out in 1942, from March till about end of May. In 3 months, they took him. We didn't know where. We wasn't thinking they will take him and gas him and shoot him. We thought they're going to resettle him somewhere. We didn't even know where. And they will work and they will live. But I had a feeling that something bad is coming, so I escaped. And my brother too, Sam. And we went in central Czechoslovakia, mountain country, and there we were hiding for about a month. But then the Germans came in the same town, and 15-20 minutes before, we all escaped to the mountains. Of course, they were shooting from planes. Like I said, we were not even dressed up. We were cooking and washing. We left everything cooking, maybe still cooking there now. And we left. And this lasted about 9 to 10 months. And then misery came in, because the Germans sealed up all the entrance in the forest, large forest, which you could hide, but you could hide, but you have to have food, you have to have shelter. And till about December of 1944, somehow we were managing to eat something. I don't think it was more than 60 pounds when the war finished. And we had the same clothes on for 10 months. Never changed clothes. We didn't have any. We couldn't go in town, we have to live in the wilderness. In March of 45, we couldn't take it any longer, so we tried to climb mountains to go the 3 kilometers to the Russian. But to climb inexperienced, without food and clothes, proper clothes, boots. You try to climb high mountains in snow and in ice. You can't. We don't have directions where to go. So we decided in March we will go over to the Russian. And it's not far, but you climb a mountain. And we thought we are going to be free, but we went instead to the right, which was the Russian. We went to left, right in the Germans. They let us in, closed us from the back, from the mountains, and let fire on us, machine gun. 75 people, men, women, children, babies, 80, 90-year-old, all kind. Some of us came out. 70, 68, 69 were shot on the spot. We heard him shooting, and then I decided, whatever happens, I'm running. We ran down in a creek, you know, and we stayed there. We didn't breathe, we didn't cough, thank God, or sneeze, because we would be finished. And then we heard speaking in German and laughing. Now, we spoke German in that area, so you couldn't tell if it was the Germans or it was us. But we had a feeling that the Germans, SS, you know how far they were? It's from here to the street. We heard every word they said. These Jews will come out in the morning if we get them. This was about 4 or 5 in the afternoon. And then got real quiet. We waited about 30 minutes, and I remember my boots, the creek was going by the boot, and I couldn't get loose my foot. It froze. We came back where we started, and this was question, who will bury who in snow? They couldn't bury anybody in snow. Who will bury who? It is a question of hours or days, because I remember I told Sam, you know, your face is red and green and blue, all kind of colors. He said to me, your face looks the same. So all of us there who were there, it's a question who will bury who. And then one day, April the 4th, I was chopping wood, and I remember hit my face, it swelled up, and I heard in Czech, Žid, it means Jews, come down, the Russian army is here. Most of them went wild, I mean, totally wild, running like they were in town. They started to eat in the villages by the mountains. To know who survived, who didn't survive, in each town, in the Jewish community, people went there, they wrote down, I am Bernard Kane, I survived and I go home. And so messages went down from mouth to mouth all over the country. And then I find out in one town, Sam is looking for me, I looked for Sam, and we went. You didn't have transportation to go home because the railroad, the rails, the Germans destroyed. So let's go 50 miles, took us a day or 2 or 3 to get there. So finally I came home, and then I find Sam, and then we start our life.
In the Russian concentration camp, I was there for over 4.5 years. Primarily, you did not go through the same hell what you went through in the German concentration camp. But nevertheless, you suffered out of hunger. Food was the prime, item which was completely out of range, completely. You were living on a bowl of soup all day long, and a little slice of black bread of that size. And what did you do all day? There was compulsory labor work. You went to the forest, to the woods, you were cutting trees in a and a temperature of about 0 degrees or 10 below zero. Clothing was not sufficient. And let me give you about one item. I would say at least about 60% of all the prisoners who came to the concentration camp perished. The only ones who survived were those who did not smoke. I want you to understand, this was a very important item. In other words, the people who did not smoke, once in a while, the management of the camp or the government gave out very small, tiny portions of tobacco. So those who smoke were trading tobacco for bread. So all those prisoners who were in the camp did not smoke had a double portion of bread by trading it for tobacco. And this was a very important item, and this gave you some more nourishment, to survive. And it went down like this for about, I would say it was there till 1948. Now, I know there's a question for you, how come you were there till 1948? The answer is very simple. When they arrested me in Lublin, they took me as a German citizen because I came from Warsaw. And I want you to understand that the Russian authorities, had very little knowledge who belonged to the Russian side, who belonged to the Polish side. By them was one thing. If a person came from Warsaw, he's a German. If he comes from the other side, he's a Russian. But to survive in the concentration camp over there in Russia was a tremendous, it was practically a miracle. I remember they used to bring Polish, prisoners, tall ones, 6 foot, 6'5". They didn't last no more than 2 or 3 weeks, and they were perished because they did not get enough food.
I want you to know, and this is a witness fact, which I was there in the city. When the Germans started to catch people on the streets and take them to work, I, for instance, was taken in October of 1939, and they took me to work to the airport by the name of Okenche. And we started to get hit from left and right. I was just right here on the head for which I suffer right now till now. And some of the people were not returned home, but they were put on train to Treblinka. When they took them to Treblinka, this was the inception of it, the beginning, of the ovens when they started to operate. The minute they took them off the train, they told them to undress. They left all their clothing, all their possessions on the spot. You got it? And took them right away into the gas chambers. They also picked a number of Sonderkommandos, that means the people who will take care, on the clothes to put back into the cars, into the trains. One of them got into the train and he was covered up with the clothing. You got it? This is the way how he escaped back to Warsaw. When he came back to Warsaw, he went to the Judenrat. The Judenrat means that the Germans were very smart. They didn't want to do anything, but they picked, let's say, the heads of the community, and they told them to organize a Judenrat. That means an assembly, a council. You got it? And they gave out the orders to the council what to do with the Jews, how many Jews to deliver, or what kind of work to do. And when this individual came to the council and told them the story, what he witnessed, they all claimed that that man is off his mind. How can you visualize, how can you think to take living people and put them into gas chambers? They couldn't believe it that a nation, an intelligent nation like Germany, should be in a position to do crimes of that nature. How could everybody visualize this? Nobody believed it, but nevertheless that happened. And when did you start to come out to the open? After when they had already, cremated, about 100,000 people. Then they start to come up, and then people start to hide themselves to try to plan for the future. How can we go into bunkers? As a matter of fact, that at that time, I left Warsaw, and I went to the other side, to the Polish side, and never came back anymore. But my sisters, who were with my mother, used to go forth and back to the sewer system in Warsaw. You know about the sewer system? And through that system, you went to go forth and back. One of my sisters, who went back, forth and back, and my mother told her, don't come anymore, since you have papers as a Polish, individual, stay there over there. And the last time she didn't make it because the Germans put in gas in the sewer system, and there she left up to this date. You got it. My other sister who witnessed it survived, survived, and she is today in Canada.
I'm Ziggy Isaacson. From my short synopsis on your sheet, you know that I am a survivor of many concentration camps. I had the privilege of being in these fine hotels from 1940 to 1945, 5 years. And originally I was born in Germany as a very, very small child. My parents moved back to Poland, and I was raised and educated in Warsaw, Poland. Then irony of the war of the World War II is that I went back to Germany in 1940, not as a free man, but as a slave laborer. There was no real reason to be moved from camp to camp. The idea was as follows. One was if an area or a camp, don't forget that this camp would sell us to industrialists. In other words, we were working for nothing. We did not get paid, not even fed or clothes. But the SS collected money for us. So let's say a large industrial complex would need 1,000 or 2,000 workers. So they would notify a large camp like Auschwitz or Buchenwald or Gross Rosen, and many of them, who had quite a number of people there in the camps, and they would, for instance, in my case, when I left Auschwitz, there was an industrialist from southern Germany who came in and needed 700 people, among them certain trades. And I was tipped off, you raise your hand no matter what trade they call out, get out of here. And I did. So there were no reasons. However, when we went from one camp to Auschwitz, there was a reason, because the work ended over there. We were cleaning up a refinery, and the work ended. And when it ended, what do we do with the Jews? Send them to Auschwitz. They have the gas chambers and the crematoriums. If they need them over there, then they will be selected by Mengele for work. If not, straight line to the gas chambers. My transport, when I came into Auschwitz, was a very lucky transport. I don't know how many more were like this. We did not see Mengele. He didn't see us. We're processed through the entire system as they process those who are being selected for work, and we were assigned a camp inside the complex. We were awakened around depending on the camp, between 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning. I was getting up every morning at 4 o'clock. Then it was the roll call, which Mrs. Fogel was speaking. Those were the worst hour to 2 and 3 hours a day at the roll calls, because the roll call took place outside in an assembly place. Summertime was half so bad. Wintertime, or in the spring or fall, when the rains were, you had to stay there sometimes quite a few hours. Why it took so long? Imagine a camp such as Auschwitz, which had in our compound of where I was, at least something like 60,000 prisoners. And count 60,000 people in the dark, and the dead had to be counted too. And no calculators, no edit machines. Everything is done by hand and head. And just figure out that there would be no mistakes made. So if the count was not correct, then somebody must have escaped. But this you had to make sure that nobody escaped or did escape. So it was over and over and over again. We were lined up in lines, 5 lines, and the capo, which was the eldest or the supervisor, I don't know what you want to call him, I know what I call him, would count, and then he would report to the assessment. Suppose he made a mistake. Suppose the assessment would make a mistake by adding on the numbers. And that could have taken hours and hours. We had that kind of a roll call in the morning and a roll call in the evening. Now those of us who were in concentration camp where we worked outside of the camps, where you had to meet, for instance, I was in one camp where we had to meet a train. Now the train is not going to be waiting for us. Well, this was a freight train which had to be fitted into the schedule so no passenger train or other freight train would not run into us or something like this. So we had to be there, let's say at 7 o'clock in the morning. So the roll calls were shorter, but in Auschwitz, we could stay there the whole day, count and count and count over. So this was the beginning. After the roll call, we would get, depending again different camps. In some camps, they would give you the portion of bread, which amounted to something like maybe 2-3 slices of bread that we know of it today. And something which they called coffee was a substitute. Coffee was imitation coffee. There was not real beans. It was just colored water. And this was your breakfast. And then march out to work. You worked, depending again in the camp, from sunup to sundown. There was no 8-hour work day. So during the work day, they would bring what they called soup for lunch. Soup was water with some dehydrated vegetables floating around in it. And again, no any kind of fats in it, and no vitamins, just water and dehydrated vegetables, and that was called soup. In the evening, we're lined up and go back to camp, counted again. But the real roll call came when all the groups came back to camp. And we were counted again. Now, if that evening roll call lasted too many hours, that there was no time anymore for any kind of food, for evening food, then we went to bed without. Don't forget, they gave us nothing in camps. And I mind telling you, when one had to go to the bathroom, you did not have toilet. None of us in the concentration camp had soap for 5 years. The only time I had soap was when I arrived in Auschwitz. On top of it, I didn't know that soap was made from human fat, from all these victims who perished in the crematorium. That's the only time I had soap in 5 years. Sleeping quarters in most camps were bunk beds, but not the way you know it if you are a member of a family with many children. Our bunk beds were 4 tiers up, in some camps 5 tiers. I was lucky enough that in all the camps I was, there were 4 tiers, including Auschwitz. So under the bunks were wooden bunks. Bunks, yeah, wooden bunks. And you didn't have any mattresses. In some camps we would get a straw sack. A sack was filled with straw, and you would be laying on it. No sheets, no pillows, and a blanket. Was a blanket for summer and winter. It was the same blanket, full of lice. And for instance, I cut up my blanket because I didn't have any socks, so I rolled them around my legs to keep warm. If you were caught, you died. And I don't know how in the world they never noticed that I had those made out of the blankets, but I had it. That's about all. And you slept, and many camps I slept on the boards with a blanket and no pillow. The pillow was, if you dared to take off your clothes at night, that you don't lose it, then you had this for a pillow. Otherwise, your arm was your pillow. That's what the sleeping condition. No toilets. I don't know how the women did it, but I know how we did it. We had a big garbage can at the end of the block, and I saw some pictures depicting the lines to this garbage can at night to relieve yourself, because all what you heard from me is that our diet was liquid. The only solid were the 2-3 slices of bread a day. The rest of it was all liquid. So you can imagine how many times we got up in the middle of the night to go to that garbage can to relieve ourselves. I don't know how the women did it, I never asked. As a matter of fact, maybe some of Mrs. Fogel will tell us later on. But what system they used? Because you were not allowed to leave the block at night. You were found outside of the block at night and you were shot. Not asking any questions, what's doing? You were shot, period. I was in 1944 in Auschwitz when an uprising took place in the area of the crematoriums. What happened over there, each of the crematoriums had and the gas chamber had a group of people who worked over there. When I was over there, it was the 13th group from the inception of the camp. Now these groups, they call them the Sonderkommando. This is a special group of people. This group did not live very long, at the most 90 days, 3 months, and then they would change another one, because they didn't want any witnesses and they didn't want to take a chance when they will have to leave in a hurry and leave some witnesses behind what happened over there. A group of women who worked in the ammunition factory began smuggling out of the factory powder, gunpowder. In their uniforms, they were pockets. I don't remember the day, but it was in the spring, because I left shortly after the Auschwitz. It was in the spring of the year. You heard 2 explosions. They blew up 2 crematoria. The idea was to blow up the crematoria, which we asked the Allies to bomb that for the last 3 years before that happened, and they were busy doing something else, and excuses that it's not a military target, that they cannot risk their planes. When they were asked by the underground to bomb the railroad tracks and the crematoria to slow down the process. After blowing up, the plan was to escape. Little they knew that behind the crematoria there were swamps. And as they were running out of the crematoriums after blowing it up, because by then the SS was already alerted, and they were all machine gunned without an exception. Everybody perished over there. Those who did not run out and who were caught before that, because you know their fate, they were gassed and cremated. In 2 of my camps, I witnessed, in one camp I witnessed hanging after they recaptured those who escaped. In another camp, it was a brutal killing. By that I mean the escapees were brought back to camp, being dragged behind a car for 10 or 15 miles, I don't know for sure. And when they finally brought them back to camp, when we were waking up in the morning and counted, we saw them hanging from the tree. Our punishment for that was that we had, when we got our so-called coffee and the ration of bread, we were told to sit down and eat that right there. For some of us, we saved the bread so we can spread it out during the day. But we're told to eat our ration of bread, drink the coffee while looking at the tree. We were hung from the tree as a punishment for escape. And believe me, in concentration camps, we had cases where the SS would not flog or not even hang the person when he was sentenced for punishment. But they made us to do it for them. And you can imagine, if you had a dear friend, if you were told to give him 25 lashes, you know how you would feel. If you have to hang your own brother or uncle or what have you. A veteran of 7 concentration camps, 5 years in camps. It was very unfortunate for me that I was arrested in 1940, and fortunate that I survived to 1945, going through all the experiences, including sicknesses, which kills people, and including all this malnutrition which we lived through, and yet, at the age of 23, I survived. I knew what happened to my mother and most of my maternal family, because in Auschwitz I was told. People have seen them, they came in with a transport. But I did not know the enormity of the tragedy. And unexplained to me and to tens of thousands of other survivors. When we found out about it, we were as numb and as cold as a stone. I personally couldn't cry or laugh for about 25 years after the liberation. Nothing moved me. Nothing. Death, happiness, whatever. Nothing would move me. I couldn't shed a tear or express myself laughing. So we became numb after what we heard and we saw and what we experienced. We cannot blame the children of the Germans today who are this generation for what they have done, for what their parents and grandparents have done. But I will never forgive those who participated in it, including those who still live here in the United States, the former Nazis, and we have plenty of them. We're deporting one almost every month from the United States because we cannot prosecute them. You heard the reference to Eichmann, and there were many Eichmanns among them. Mengele was not alone. Hitler was not alone. 80% or more of the intelligentsia of the cultural society of Germany, educated people, participate in this massacre.